Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi met US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Japan's Osaka, their first meeting after Prime Minister Modi's re-election in the recently concluded Lok Sabha polls. PM Modi and President Trump touched upon a range of issues, including various bilateral and global issues, including Iran, trade, defense, and 5G communications networks. The one-on-one talks were held after Prime Minister Modi, Trump and Shinzo Abe met for the Japan-America-India trilateral. Soon after the meeting with Donald Trump, Prime Minister Modi held a meeting with the BRICS leaders and spoke about strengthening WTO, fighting protectionism, ensuring energy security, and the need to work together to fight terrorism. The G20 is an international financial forum comprising 19 nations and the European Union. It focuses on pressing financial and economic issues, seeking to address issues that go beyond the responsibilities of any one organization. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at India at the ongoing G20 Summit in Osaka, Japan. Joining me on the program today are Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, Pramitpal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, retired, Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyze and put into perspective how India's day went on day one of the G20 Summit in Osaka, Japan.
Well, Prime Minister Modi's day has been packed. I don't know of any other forum, international forum, which brings in leaders, the top leaders of the world, who are responsible for almost 85% of the global GDP. And one after the other, he has had a series of bilateral, trilateral, and larger meetings. The day started off pretty well with which involves Japan, US, and India. And then the big meeting with President Trump, where a lot of attention was focused. The attention had become keener after the famous tweet by President Trump. But the first moral of the story is that, President Trump does have a habit of using superlatives, so one shouldn't take that very seriously. But the very fact that he greeted Prime Minister Modi warmly, he spoke of the importance of the relationship, he spoke of in India and US, engaging in major positives. And what I found was quite significant and a reflection of the confidence and maturity of the relationship, that both leaders spelled out their agenda up front. I have never seen this happening at a public forum. But that and the agenda was both on the positives and where we have divergences. So from all appearances, the meeting went off quite well. The body language was positive. The fact that External Affairs Minister and Secretary of State had a preparatory meeting seems to have had a very good impact, because the Indian position would have been explained to President Trump. So I think that this augurs well for the relationship. It symbolizes continuity and it symbolizes the ability of both sides to handle hiccups.
Right, all right. Pramit, let me bring you into the picture now. After the tweet that we saw on Thursday from President Trump about the tariff issue with India, were you surprised at how well the meeting went today? Did you expect any kind of fireworks when Prime Minister Modi and President Trump met?
Not really. If you look at what happened in the run-up to the G20, Trump attacked India, Vietnam, China, Japan, the European Union, all on tariffs. He does this on a regular basis because he has a personal obsession with tariffs. He thinks tariff barriers, bringing down tariff barriers is important to his political base at home. And he's not incorrect in saying that India has among the highest tariffs in the world, at least for manufactured goods. So he does this on a regular basis. He begins by attacking a whole set of countries, and he doesn't really care whether the country is a friend or an enemy. He's also gone after Israel, arguably the closest country in the world to him in terms of foreign policy. on trade issues. He's very clear on trade, and is one thing, strategic relations is another. It's somewhat took a while for a lot of the world to understand that President Trump sort of divides these two as two separate issues. So, but Trump does this very often. He will remind a country of what he thinks is a big issue, and then have a completely normal and affable meeting afterwards, person to person. I think notably, and this is what I think differentiates, for example, his relationship with China, where he also attacks China on trade issues, but he's often critical, and the Chinese do the same. He is often critical of Xi Jinping in person. He cites Xi as an issue, and the Chinese attack him as an individual. Xi Jinping, in a run-up to their meeting tomorrow, has actually taken several swipes at the United States. Modi has not done that, and Trump has never attacked Modi as an individual. In fact, quite the opposite. He has always praised Modi as a person. So I think I wasn't all that surprised. What was really I was looking for, and I think what we saw, as Vishnu has correctly pointed out, Trump, when they meet, he is effectively sending a signal to his own staff and to his government and his administration that I have problems, we have problems with India, but I want them to be resolved in a manner that does not disturb the bilateral relationship.
Sure. Right.
And Trump, you'll notice several times he said it was a positive meeting. When asked what does he want of India on the trade front, he refused to specify, i.e. that's left to the negotiators. And otherwise was completely positive about what was happening between the two countries.
Right.
And I think what was interesting, India put forward, as you mentioned 5G, India put forward a remarkable suggestion, and we'll be curious to see whether we can do this, to resolve the Huawei problem. Forget about Huawei. Why doesn't India and the US, who neither have 5G technology right now, combine their forces and create their own 5G? And
Sure.
Trump did not refuse this. He didn't shoot this down. So I'm curious to see where this is going to go.
Absolutely. And in all of this, in the bilateral relationship, we saw Iran being brought up. I'm going to go back to a point that Ambassador Vishnu Prakash was making about how both leaders came straight to the point without really beating around the bush or wasting any time. Iran was taken up with the US President. General, can we expect anything on that front?
You see, Iran, as far as the India-Iran relationship is concerned, I think it's a very close relationship. And we have a very high dependency of energy from Iran, which is gradually being reduced based on the sanctions. Now, I think this is our concern, but this is not an American concern. America is quite okay as far as its own energy resources are concerned. They are not dependent on the Gulf anymore. They are self-contained, and in fact, they are also exporting energy to other countries. But that is not the case with India. And we need the Iranian crude. But I think for a moment of time, I have a feeling that we will continue to import lesser and lesser quantities of Iranian crude and hope that this problem between Iran and the US gets over in a shorter time frame. It is important for us actually because when you're looking at the slightly larger strategic picture, if a conflict breaks out, and it is a possibility, Iran has already shot down a US drone. Tankers have been attacked, which have been attributed to Iran, though Iran has denied it. And we really don't know what can be the trigger of getting onto a wider conflict in the Gulf. And any conflict in the Gulf is going to have a very serious repercussions on the energy security of India. One, the fuel prices will skyrocket, but most importantly, it may lead to even a shortage of fuel. And I think that is a danger which we need to be cognizant of and start preparing for. I hope it doesn't take place, but it is better to be aware. I think this is the only aspect of the Iranian relationship as far as we are concerned. Of course, Iran, I think, in a larger sense, Iran is actually a natural ally of the United States when we are looking at the situation in Afghanistan. The fact that they are bitter enemies today may not really be a permanent situation. Looking down the line a year or two hence, there may be a regime change, there may be some other events happening globally. And again, you will find a very strong friendship developing between the two countries. Because if you want to deal with the situation in Afghanistan, which the Americans are very keen on, then Iranian and US friendship will actually be a very positive step towards that direction.
Certainly. Right. All right, let's broaden the scope of the discussion and move forward. Now, let's not forget there was a meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS nations as well, Ambassador. As far as that particular meeting was concerned, we saw the Prime Minister taking up the issue of terrorism. Terrorism certainly is extremely high as far as India is concerned, high on the agenda to ensure that the world comes together and try and deal with this menace.
Absolutely, Frank. Not just at BRICS, Prime Minister has flagged the issue of terrorism at every fora, with President Trump at the GO plenary and with all his interlocutors, for the simple reason that this is the biggest challenge that India faces. And it's not just a challenge that India faces, it's the biggest challenge that the globe faces. But there ends the similarities, because there are different terror groups which are operating in different countries. Their motives are different, their modus operandi is different, their inspiration is different. And therefore, it is a little surprising that while everybody condemns terrorism, the world is not willing even to agree on a definition of terrorism for the last 23 years. You recall that in 1996, we had proposed a comprehensive convention on international terrorism. Let's come closer home. 2 days ago, when Secretary of State was here, he said that Iran is the biggest sponsor of state terrorism. I mean, I was quite surprised, because it's another country to our west, a country called Pakistan. So there are differences of approach, but one or two facts are very clear. There's a global fatigue against terrorism. There are steps being taken to choke the terrorist financial flows. FATF is playing a useful role. That role needs to be strengthened. And the world does understand India's concerns and challenges, because, for example, it did take 10 years to list Masood Azhar as a global terrorist, but the UN Security Council, a certain country had to be arm twisted, but the UN Security Council condemned unanimously the Pulwama incident. So it is a long haul, it's a long challenge, and one of the reasons why it was raised in the BRICS is that China has been the patron saint of Pakistan, and the message has to go to China that this goes to the heart of Sino-Indian relationship also, and they have to rise above petty considerations. Whether China will pay heed is moot. I am not very optimistic at this juncture, but certainly we will have to press ahead, we'll have to retrade and strengthen our defenses.
Sure.
Frank?
Sure. General, I'd like to bring in the picture right now, talking about terrorism. How serious is the world in really trying to tackle this problem of terrorism? Because at the end of the day, we all know that Pakistan uses it as a state policy, and, it's affecting American interests in Afghanistan, but it affects us more than anyone else. So are the others really on board?
Now, let me put it this way. The people who will really go all out to fight terrorism are the ones who are wearing the shoe which pinches. Now, if it is not pinching you, I think that person is not going to be concerned. If you look at the American view and why they are looking at Iran as the prime sponsor of terrorism, that is a view which Israel also holds. And that is really due to what is happening on the Israeli borders, where they are being attacked. And that attack is coming from people whom they believe Iran is supporting. Now, that really doesn't impact India so much. We are impacted much more by what Pakistan is doing and what is happening in Afghanistan. So that is our level of concern. If you look at what is happening in other parts of the globe, if you look at South America, then those are concerns which are specific to those people. Africa, when you look at Africa, and when an incident takes place where 200 people have been killed, it doesn't even hit the front page of Indian newspapers. So, but if something happens in Europe and 2 people are killed, you will find news debates going all across the globe. I think it is very difficult to get unity to fight terrorism. But one of the ways I think we can do it, especially in the G20 forum, is looking at finances. And I think if the FATF is strengthened, then that could be a very positive step, regardless of the fact that we can't define terrorism as of now. It depends on who's the terrorist. For Pakistan, as being, let us take the view of Pakistan. They have created certain groups whom they support, and they are fighting certain groups who are fighting their government, and it is all within the same country. So this sort of thing, I presume, is going to continue to play about. And in my view, it is as far as India is concerned, we have to be strong. We have to strengthen our own defenses, and we have got to hit out at the terror camps. I think in one of the things which we have been very successful is in terms of foreign policy, where the Prime Minister himself over the last 5 years has consistently gone out and spread this message. And I think all our embassies abroad, from the Minister for External Affairs and all our ambassadors and high commissioners abroad and their staff, I think here they have done a brilliant job, because for the first time, even after Balakot, you didn't find one voice criticizing India for sending fighter aircraft deep inside Pakistani territory and bombing them. Whereas when Pulwama happened, you found the whole world coming together to condemn the incident. So this is reflective of a foreign policy success. It is not really a success as far as terrorism is concerned, but at least the issue has been put on center stage. And I think it is very important to at least have the world conscious of this effect. And the more and more we have the ability and the capacity to isolate Pakistan, to squeeze them financially, militarily we can do it at any point of time. I think that message has gone. I think at some point of time, wisdom will dawn, not on the Pakistan military, but on the people of Pakistan, that they cannot afford it anymore, and they have to put pressure on their military to back off. It is not going to happen otherwise.
Right. Praveen, so let's move on now and talk about another issue really as far as these the G20 grouping is concerned, and something that's really bothering all of them, the issue of trade, tariff and the WTO. Now, Prime Minister Modi at the informal BRICS meetings spoke about strengthening the WTO, fighting protectionism and ensuring energy security. Now, this issue of trade and tariff, how big a problem is it really as far as these nations are concerned?
Well, India unfortunately doesn't have much influence on trade. We barely represent 1.5% of global trade, and we are seen by most countries, not just the United States, as basically a protectionist economy. And for the time being at least, it doesn't look like that's going to change. We have, like most countries, we have built our trade policy, our multilateral trade policy, around the WTO. But the impact of partly, I would argue, China's constant cheating or failure to fulfill its WTO obligations and the American response means that the WTO is now starting to lose relevance. And I think if you look at the US new NAFTA 2.0 agreement, the so-called USMCA, you saw America, Canada and Mexico lay down a new set of global standards regarding trade, including the fact that you have no barriers, for example, to the movement of data across borders. Much tighter requirements regarding subsidies and so on and so forth. So this new set of standards, America has now transferred to its negotiations with the US-Japan FTA and the US-Korea FTA. Once those countries, and my understanding is Japan has no real objections to most of these positions, you will then have 2 out of the 4 major trading blocs nations will have agreed to a new set of externally standards outside the WTO. If the European Union follows suit, then you will have 3 out of the 4, China being the 4th. And these are effectively designed to box in China more than anything else. The problem is that India is sort of a halfway house because we have similarities to the Chinese, especially on the number of state-owned enterprises, and we're still debating the issue of data localization. So our problem is that we will then be caught in between, if you wish, to an older system, a regime that is now declining in importance, and a new one in which we have no say. And I think the government has ordered, Modi has ordered Professor Sujit Bhalla to write a new trade policy brief, and I'm hoping that will push us a little further ahead of the curve than it is right now. But for the time being, yes, we're looking at a new international trading system starting to arise that is outside the WTO. And the new possibility of new WTO reforms in which the one nation, one vote process is eventually disbanded is another thing that is now starting to build up momentum. So the trade system is now going to be radically different, I think, globally in the next 10 to 20 years. And it's something we have to both monitor and adjust to.
Certainly. All right. Okay. Ambassador, so how successfully have we been able to convey our points across at the G20 summit, as well as the bilaterals and the trilaterals and multilaterals that we've had there in Osaka, Japan?
On this issue of trade and globalization and WTO, right?
And generally on everything that's high on our agenda as well.
Right. Well, that's on certain issues. Now, let me kind of backpedal a bit. India has from the very beginning, which not just the finance ministers' meetings, which started, I think, in 2000 or 1999 after the Asian economic crisis, but 2008 when we had the first G20 summit. India has been a key player. India's voice has been listened to with a lot of respect. And as you mentioned in your opening remarks, G20 was meant to be a financial forum to bring in global transparency and reforms in the global economic architecture and promote economic growth. Now, in the initial years, the first 2-3 years, it did serve the purpose because that was the era of globalization. All countries were working in concert and things improved. Fast forward to 2019, globalization is gasping for oxygen. WTO is kind of under a lot of stress, and the world is divided. The US, the biggest economy in the world, US, and the second largest economy in the world, China, are at loggerheads. So it is a situation which I don't know whether G20 is prepared for, because G20 is meant to work in concert. Now, that said, India has been putting forward its position that, as Pramit mentioned, we are a growing economy, we are doing better, but we don't have too much of an impact when it comes to leveraging the outcome of discussions on economic issues. And our own track record, I'm afraid, because we have been protectionistic, because we have, for example, not concluded any FTA, SEPA or upgradation for years. And we have been talking about it, but we have just been talking. I'm afraid we need to do much better than that. Now, today the challenge is that we could be excluded from RCEP. And that is something that worries me. Our manufacturing base is narrow. We have a large trade deficit. So in short, we have economic challenges. And I'm afraid, I'm being frank, that we have to get first our own act together. We have to get our own house in order, clean up our own act. And but the good news is that our economy is growing. We are likely to be a $5 trillion economy in 5 years. By 2030, a $10 trillion economy. We have a growing middle class, etc., etc. So certainly the stock of India is growing. The interest that is in the globe towards India is improving. Prime Minister Modi's re-election has enabled him to walk tall on the international stage. And it is the miracle of democracy.
Right.
So all told, India is on a strong wicket, but the challenges are multiple. And I would like that we engage in a give and take, because neither we nor our interlocutors can have their way. It's a situation where we have to meet each other halfway.
Okay. All right, certainly. And General, talking about another aspect altogether, if you look at the G20 summit, the focus really has been on the bilaterals, has been on the trilaterals, and somehow the G20 summit itself is, lost in translation or lost in the background. So are we moving towards an era where multilateral or, these big organizations are no longer as relevant as they used to be? And is the era now of bilaterals and trilaterals?
I think both will exist side by side for quite some time. But Indian policy is actually moving towards, India would rather prefer a multipolar world. And we would prefer to deal with bilateral and trilateral and quadrilateral issues in smaller groupings, which are manageable. I think India's stand has been very consistent that we have been looking for a multipolar world. Unlike China, which used to support a multipolar world, but now is increasingly looking at a bipolar world, which is what they would prefer. And by 2050, as per their own assessments, they would like to be the senior pole amongst the two. That is the time when they presume that they will overtake the United States. So basically, it is the way the interest of each individual states is playing out. I think in this particular meeting, a few things have happened. Like when you're looking at the Indian Ocean, you find Japan, America, and India getting together in JAI, because it is very important for us, for India especially, when we are looking at freedom of navigation. And here, the interests of all three coincide. China is not really looking at it from that point of view, because they are looking at domination over the South China Sea, and they want to break free onto the 9-dash line. That means that ultimately means that they would have taken over Taiwan. That is what the implication is of the 9-dash line. When we are looking at our relations, when we are looking at BRICS, I think it is also a reassurance which India is giving to Russia that we will buy the S-400 Triumph, right? And these are bilateral issues, and we will not be pressurized by other countries to desist from a relationship which we have held for very long on the defense sphere.
Certainly, right.
We will also see that Russia is also leasing us a nuclear submarine. I think it's a $3 billion deal, which is being negotiated now.
Right.
So that is the second one which we will get from them. One we are already using. We are dependent on Russia for a large number of defense supplies. That is a separate issue. We are also we are getting increasingly close to the United States on a different set of defense purchases. As of now, Japan has, as per their statement, they have said, okay, we will sell the US to STOL aircraft, you see. That's the short takeoff and landing aircrafts. Though as per their, it is being used by the Maritime Defense Forces, but as of now, they haven't sold it to anybody else.
Right.
But I think they are increasingly getting to the idea that, okay, we will sell these type of aircraft to the Indian Ocean countries.
Sure.
So again, we are, a whole lot of interests are coinciding and they are diverging. So we need to strengthen the convergences and look around ways by which we can soften the divergences wherever they exist.
Ambassador, I'm just going to come to you. I saw you putting up your hand there. Let me get Pramit Pal to say one last final comment on the program, and then you can close the show for us. Pramit, what's the best way forward as far as India is concerned? What is in India's best interest?
Well, the key point for us, we have a number of economic issues that we're interested in. The General has mentioned the question of energy stability, price stability, more than supply. Supply, I don't think, is a problem. The world has excess oil right now. But we do want to ensure that the prices don't spike. And that's what we've really been talking about with the Americans on Iran sanctions, is you go ahead and sanction Iran, but what you need to do is guarantee that the price does not spike. And we've been in negotiations with Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iraq on that point. While we want trade policy to constrain China's failure to fulfill its obligations, we don't want the international trading system to fall apart. And so whatever little we can do, we can try to keep repeating, as the Prime Minister does, that you've got to maintain the trading system of the world.
Sure.
You need to reform but not destroy the international trading system.
Right.
And then finally, as is mentioned, the Japan, India, America part is ultimately a big geopolitical statement, because this is now the second time that G20 Summit has incorporated this specific trilateral. And in our statement, we've said, henceforth, this will now become a regular part of the G20, and it will focus only on the Indo-Pacific.
Sure. Yes. All right. Ambassador, close the show for us with a concluding remark.
Well, Frank, what you raised was a very pertinent thought. Whether G20 continues to be as relevant as it was earlier, or whether it is not the plenary, but what happens on the margins are more important. Now, two comments here very briefly. One, I'm afraid the G20's main focus has been lost. it has been diluted. There has been an agenda overload. I mean, I'm reminded of a Christmas tree where everybody hangs an ornament. Now, global issues almost all global issues have been woven into the G20, so that has diluted the focus on the economic issues, which
Right.
is I'm not a fan of that process. But it is on the margins. I mean, more than the plenary, it is the business that is transacted on the margins, where world leaders mingle, meet in different formats, bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, and so on.
Sure.
I think that is very, very significant. So, my hope and expectation is more of a expectation is that the G20 process, we will continue to participate actively because it is becoming a very potent forum for this purpose that I mentioned, that the decision makers of the world congregate. But I do hope that the focus gets narrowed again and is brought to bear on the economic issues, which is really the bread and butter for every country in the world.
Sure.
Frank?
All right, certainly. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.